Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiridoluale, the headlines. U.S. President Joe Biden seeks to expel Russia from the United Nations Human Rights Council. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov dismisses accusations of war crimes in Ukraine, asks the United States to look in the mirror. And the United States stops Russian bond payments. U.S. President Joe Biden believes that it is, quote, ludicrous that Russia is a member of the United Nations Human Rights Council, and the United States will seek to have Russia removed from the 193-member body. The White House press secretary, Ian Parkey, told reporters that the White House, told reporters at the White House that removing Russia would be the next appropriate step in the process. Earlier on, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, had said Russia should have its membership suspended after Ukraine accused Russian troops of killing dozens of civilians in the town of Bucha. A two-thirds majority vote by the 193-member General Assembly can suspend a state for persistently committing gross and systematic violations of human rights. Mrs. Greenfield wants to have the vote this week. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine began on February the 24th, the Assembly has adopted 2 resolutions denouncing Russia with 140 votes in favor. Moscow says it is carrying out a special operation to demilitarize Ukraine.
He believes it's ludicrous for Russia to be a member of the Human Rights Council, and certainly the ambassador spoke to this today, and while she was on her overseas trip, and she will continue to make the case in her role when she returns to New York. I would point you to our UN ambassador on what specific steps, but obviously removing them would be the next appropriate step in the process.
Meanwhile, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says President Joe Biden will consult allies to ensure Russia and President Vladimir Putin pay the price for war crimes being committed in Ukraine. Speaking to reporters at the White House, Mr. Sullivan said he had yet to see evidence that Russian authorities had risen to the level of genocide, but said consultations might take place at the International Criminal Court or another venue. The discovery of a mass grave and bodies shot at close range in Bucha outside Kiev, a town Ukrainian forces reclaimed from Russian troops, looked set to galvanize the United States and Europe into imposing additional sanctions against Moscow. Earlier, Mr. Biden had accused Mr. Putin of war crimes and called for a trial, adding to the global outcry over civilian killings in Bucha as more graphic images of their deaths emerge. The Kremlin categorically denied any accusations related to the murder of civilians, including in Bucha, where it said the graves and corpses had been staged by Ukraine to tarnish Russia. Asked whether the killings in Bucha could be on Mr. Putin's orders or by Russian forces acting alone, Mr. Sullivan said that even before the invasion, Washington had warned that Russia was intending, as a matter of policy in the war, to kill dissidents and to impose a reign of terror across occupied territories in Ukraine.
So I don't quite accept the images that we see are tragic, they're shocking, but unfortunately, they're not surprising. We released information even before Russia's invasion, showing that Russia would engage in acts of brutality against civilians, including targeted killings of dissidents and others they deemed a threat to their occupation. And as the horrific images that have emerged from Bucha have shown, that's exactly what they have done. We had already concluded that Russia committed war crimes in Ukraine, and the information from Bucha appears to show further evidence of war crimes. And as the president said, we will work with the world to ensure there is full accountability for these crimes. We are also working intensively with our European allies on further sanctions to raise the pressure and raise the cost on Putin and on Russia. We have to consult with our allies and partners on what makes most sense as a mechanism moving forward. Obviously, the ICC is one venue where war crimes have been tried in the past, but there have been other examples in other conflicts of other mechanisms being set up. So there's work to be done to work out the specifics of that. And between now and then, every day, what we are focused on is continuing to apply pressure to the Russian economy and provide weapons to the Ukrainian people.
In reaction to that, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says that Western accusations that its soldiers killed civilians in northern Ukraine are false and promised to expose those behind the news. The U.S. President Joe Biden had accused Mr. Putin, as Russia's president, of war crimes and called for a trial, adding to the global outcry over civilian killings in the Ukrainian town of Bucha. The Kremlin had categorically denied any such accusations and asked at a news conference about Mr. Biden's comments. Mr. Lavrov had said the West should first consider its own actions in Iraq and Libya. Mr. Lavrov said Russia's mission to the United Nations would hold a press conference in New York with the most detailed material to show the true nature of incidents in Bucha. And Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says at least 300 civilians had been killed in Bucha, where mass graves and bodies were found after Ukraine took the town back from Russian forces. And he expects that in Borodyanka and other towns, the number of casualties may even be higher. In a visit to Bucha earlier on, Mr. Zelensky had said the crimes constituted, quote, genocide. Russia denied any accusations relating to the murder of civilians, including in Bucha. Its envoy to the United Nations, Vasily Nebenzia, says Russia will present empirical evidence to the Security Council today, showing its forces were not involved in atrocities. Mr. Zelensky, that's the Ukrainian president, is also set to address the United Nations Security Council today. And Mr. Zelensky visited towns near Kiev and surveyed the devastation caused by the military conflict in his country. Footage showed destroyed bridges and roads in Irpin, while the roads of Bucha were littered with burnt-out military vehicles. In nearby Stoyanka, Mr. Zelensky surveyed the damage to a motorway bridge, which was almost split in two. One car stood abandoned, bullet holes peppering its bodywork and windscreen. A nearby housing estate was flattened and advertising hoardings were scarred with bullet holes. Mr. Zelensky had said it had become harder for his country to negotiate with Russia since Kiev became aware of the scale of atrocities allegedly carried out by Russian troops in Ukraine. Mr. Zelensky had spoken on national television from the town of Bucha in the Kiev region, where a mass grave and other signs of executions had been found in territory retaken from the Russians. And as we've already reported, Russia says it will present factual evidence to the United Nations Security Council that its forces have not been killing civilians in Ukraine and were not involved in events in Bucha. That's according to its envoy at the UN. We have factual evidence that proves this point, Mr. Nebenzia said at a press conference, and we intend to present it to the Security Council as soon as possible so that the international community is not misled by the false narrative promoted by Kiev and its Western sponsors.
We have factual evidence that proves this point. We intend to present it to Security Council as soon as possible so that the international community is not misled by the false narrative promoted by Kiev and its Western sponsors. This is a warfare, and in warfare anything happens, and you cannot exclude that civilians are dying in the war, and that is a sad fact of life. But the footage that we are being presented with, in particular in Bucha, on which I spoke, does not give us any doubt that that was a stage. That was a stage, and we will present more evidence 3 p.m. However, the president. Anyway, let's see what happens tomorrow.
Vasily Nebenzia, the Russian envoy to the United Nations. Let's talk to Ambassador Humphrey Ojeko, Nigeria's former ambassador to Switzerland and, of course, the United Nations offices in Geneva. He joins us virtually from Abuja. Your Excellency, good morning. Thank you for your time. Welcome.
Morning. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
It does appear now that the world, after the initial flurry of action and activity surrounding this war, seems to have settled down to it as part of the goings-on, and that may mean that attention may be beginning to kind of shift away. Is that your reading of the situation?
Not really, because the goings-on, as you describe it in Ukraine, is quite new in this 21st century. The United Nations and the Western countries, and even ourselves here in Africa, should not allow a thing like this to be swept under any carpet, because any other country in any other region could become a victim of similar actions by more powerful countries. So I do not think that this is waning, simply because the West is sort of fully involved in what is going on. All the media controlled by the West will not let up on this for as long as it lasts. And it seems to be lasting for a much longer time than we thought. I'm sure than the Russians themselves thought it would last.
But then it does appear that militarily the situation is now a lot more fluid than it appeared at the beginning. And I refer to what you said about the Western media, of course, keeping an eye on it. It does appear now that some kind of stalemate is establishing itself on the ground. The Russians can't seem to take the country decisively, but the Ukrainians also cannot push them out in a decisive fashion. And that's why I said it does appear as if we're getting stuck.
Let me refer us a little bit to history. Starting from the era of the Soviet Union, the Russians are not used to amassing troops around any of its near abroad countries and expect a resistance. If you go back to Hungary, to Czechoslovakia in the Soviet era, immediately the Soviet tanks appear on the borders. There is no resistance. If you come closer to more 21st century history, when the Russians appeared on the borders of Georgia, of course, the Georgian government and the security forces did not resist. And then you come very quickly to the Crimea of just 2014. And again, there was no resistance. So I think the Russian calculation this time, amassing over almost 200,000 troops on the borders of surrounding Ukraine, was that the same scenario will play itself out. Unfortunately, it did not play out that way. And I think that is why we are where we are now. They did not expect this level of resistance from the Ukrainian army, which may have been a miscalculation on their part. Because those who know predicted initially that if this thing lasts more than 30 days, Russia will be in some difficulties. And I think that is what's going to happen. That's what's already happening, because you could see it is rejigging its strategic plans. If it had restricted its actions initially to the Donbass region, where it has recognized the two provinces, including Luhansk, this might have played out differently. Probably the West would not have been as involved as it is now, but that didn't happen. So this is not looking good for either side. Ukraine is being systematically destroyed. From the news cast you just had, look at what has happened in Bucha. If you listen to the Russian ambassador in New York, he was indirectly admitting that something happened when he said, "This is a warfare And in warfare, you have collateral damage and all of that. At the same time, he's denying on behalf of Russia that their troops didn't kill any civilians. Again, the fundamental question is, you didn't kill any civilians. What is the Russian army doing in a separate sovereign country? What did they go there to do? To offer humanitarian assistance? So that's the fundamental question. And that is why the United Nations is involved. What are you doing there? The main tenet of the United Nations is the end of the Second World War, is international peace and security. And all international law derive from that principle. That being the case, what justifies Russia's presence in Ukraine? What justifies that?
Your Excellency, let me also use the history that you have talked about. And even though in this particular case, Russia is the aggressor, and then you reference the United Nations and its role since the end of the Second World War. But if we go back in history, Russia is just the latest of the big powers that has ignored and acted outside of the United Nations. The United States itself, which is on the side of Ukraine in this particular conflict, has acted outside of the United Nations in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Grenada, in Panama, in several other places, and then other countries that are on the UN Security Council, the Big Five as they're called, have also acted outside the United Nations. So one would wonder if it is not a question of bad precedents having been set before now by some of the actors even in this conflict, that has led to others believing that, okay, so if I'm big, then I can do whatever I like, regardless of what structure is in place. Is that a fair comment?
It is strictly a fair comment, which is why in the business of diplomacy, you do not choose between who is right here and who is right and wrong is wrong. Unfortunately, that's not what drives international relations. Often what drives international relations, you and I know, is the mind and what countries consider to be their national interests. And in some cases, you might have something that looks like a justification for invasion. If, for instance, we are comparing the invasion of Afghanistan under President Bush with what is going on in Ukraine, you cannot create an equivalency because one country was attacked before the other. And somebody said, if you don't arrest or collect the invaders or the attackers and hand them over for justice, we'll come do it ourselves. That's a different scenario from, we suspect that you are trying to join. We suspect that there is Nazification going on in your country, or Russian language is not being allowed to be spoken and properly expressed in Ukraine, and so on and so forth. I do not think that anyone in the international system, Nigeria especially, would encourage those kind of excuses. In the fact that, first of all, as I have said already, this is a matter of international law. Should we be the people who support the breaking of these laws? Since we're not one of the strongest countries in the world ourselves, we don't belong to the first or even second range. Then the other thing is Russia started this a few days earlier by recognizing the sovereignty declared by two provinces of Ukraine, that is in the Donbass region, including Luhansk, of course. Again, there are so many Nigerians who are asking these same questions here. Why would Nigeria not have abstained or even supported Russia in the Uniting for Peace vote that took place at the UN General Assembly last month? The question is, if Nigeria were to travel that path, what right would we have to challenge the European Union or Britain or the United States if tomorrow they came up and said they were recognizing or supporting IPOB or Yoruba Nation or something like that? So those who make those equivalencies should better think of Nigeria's own national interests. The same goes for the Western rebuke of African countries for not coming out wholly to support the Western position. After all, these countries have their own interests and their own connections with Russia. Europe itself has not been able to totally disconnect with Russia, in spite of being members of NATO and the European Union. They are still buying energy resources from. So we should be careful how we create these equivalencies. But we cannot justify any major country invading another simply because it can.
That I guess is the lesson that we have to learn from this conflict. Ambassador, I will have to have you back on the program subsequently for us to discuss the diplomatic side of this during the course of time, because of course we've discussed the military side of it, but the diplomacy is what always ends everything, even the conflicts that have victors and losers at the end of it. We'll discuss that another time. It just remains for me to say thank you for joining us this morning on the program. Ambassador Humphrey Ojiako is Nigeria's former ambassador to Switzerland and joined us from Abuja. Thank you very much. We'll take a break. We'll take a break at this point, and when we return, we'll have more, especially about those bond payments that the United States has stopped Russia from making. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. The Pentagon says Russian forces are obviously responsible for the atrocities in the Ukrainian town of Bucha, even as it acknowledged it was not yet sure precisely which units were operating in the area. The United States and European countries pledged to punish Moscow over civilian killings in northern Ukraine, where mass grave and tied bodies of people shot at close range were found in a town seized back from Russian forces. The discoveries came against the backdrop of artillery barrages in Ukraine's south and east, where Russia says it is now focusing after it fell short in attempts to take major cities in the heart of the country.
We've seen much of the same imagery that you have. Obviously, we are in touch with our Ukrainian counterparts. We're certainly in no position to refute that these atrocities occurred, that they occurred on the scale that the Ukrainians have said they've occurred, and that Russians are responsible for that. And I think I'll just leave it at that. We don't know exactly who committed these atrocities, or at what level, or what the chain of command was. But clearly, we certainly do not refute that they happened. I think it's fairly obvious, not just to us, but to the world, that Russian forces are responsible for the atrocities in Bucha. Now, exactly who, what units, whether they're contractors or Chechens, I don't think we're able to say right now. But we're certainly not refuting that these atrocities occurred, and that they occurred at the hands of Russian. There should be no war crimes, because there should be no war in Ukraine, because Vladimir Putin still had diplomatic options on the table when he decided in late February to go ahead and cross over the border and invade a sovereign neighboring country. So, look, the international community has spoken on this. The president has spoken on this. We've spoken on this. That we believe the Russians are committing war crimes in Ukraine. They need to be documented. Evidence needs to be collected. Investigations need to be completed. The United States, not just the DOD, the United States will be a participant in that process.
Pentagon spokesperson Admiral John Kirby. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has spoken with his Ukrainian counterpart Dmytro Kuleba in a telephone call. The call, which Beijing said was made at Ukraine's request, was the first reported high-level conversation between the countries since March the 1st, when Mr. Kuleba asked Mr. Yi to use Beijing's ties with Moscow to stop Russia's invasion of Ukraine. During the call, Mr. Wang again urged talks to end the conflict. That's according to Chinese state media. Wars end eventually, Wang said. The key is how to reflect on the pain to maintain lasting security in Europe and establish a balanced, effective, and sustainable European security mechanism. He added that China stands ready to play a constructive role in this regard in an objective position. Mr. Kuleba, in a Twitter post, said he was grateful to his Chinese counterpart for solidarity with civilian victims, and added that they both had the conviction that ending the war against Ukraine serves common interests of peace, global food security, and international trade. Meanwhile, the Japanese Foreign Minister Yoshimasa Hayashi has returned from Poland with 20 Ukrainians displaced by Russia's ongoing war on their country. He says the government of Japan is committed to provide the maximum support to these 20 Ukrainians to help them live with a sense of peace in Japan, even though they are far away from their home country. Japan has an extremely strict refugee policy and has been reluctant to fully accept migrant workers, making its offer to accept Ukrainians unusual. Tokyo has previously accepted nearly 400 other Ukrainians, all relatives of about 2,000 Ukrainian residents in Japan who arrived on their own since the Russian invasion began. Let's talk to Dr. Monique Gasper, who is a medical doctor, joins us virtually from the United Kingdom capital, that's London, to talk about the humanitarian situation here, the migrants moving across borders. Dr. Gasper, thank you for your time. Welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me. Good morning.
Let's look first, of course, at the situation when people whose health status is not particularly tested or sure of cross borders, especially at the time of pandemics, which we are now. What should medical systems in receiving countries be on the lookout for?
Thank you. So this is a very sad time for Ukraine and for Europe as a whole, really. There's always been and there always will be conflicts. It's part of human nature and no doubt a culmination of disagreements. Like you said, how can we mitigate these disasters? War isn't the only humanitarian crisis. We're virtually out of a pandemic now, and we do have to have measures in place. The main problems with this is the people coming from the war zones, the consequences of what they have witnessed and what they have experienced there, as well as their coexisting health problems that they already have at that time. So you have the pre-migration problems and trauma especially, and then when they come into the host countries, you have the problems of post-migration, resettling these people and coping with their war traumas that they've experienced. In terms of the Ukraine war, we know that less than 40% of the Ukrainians have been vaccinated against COVID-19. And so them going out into other countries, as well as being in refugee camps, you can see that this is a big recipe for spread of the virus. We know that we're in another surge with a different mutant, and we know that that's what viruses do. They mutate and different strains will come up. We hope that's not the case, but we can put in place vaccination on arrival as one of the options for Ukrainians that are going to neighboring countries that are fleeing the war in their country. We also know that next to Africa, Ukraine has the highest incidence and prevalence of HIV. And because of access problems of getting antiretroviral medication to them, some of them are not able to get their medication. What does this tell us about what is going to happen with their viral load and what is going to happen with HIV generally? And these people are crossing borders as well. At the moment, their priority is survival, shelter, food and water. But we have to also put into place some of these other aspects of it. Primary care is where we would deal with most of this, and we do need as much as possible to train up professionals that can help to mitigate some of these circumstances from the Ukraine war.
The visuals, I don't know if you can see them on the screen. A lot of the movement across the borders from Ukraine into all these other countries in Europe also involve very small children, babies in many instances, and then infants, younger ones, and all of that. And they also have particular issues that are specific to them. I spoke with a Polish doctor last week, and Poland has received about 2.5 million of these migrants, and he says that some of the problems that they're dealing with are that some of the children in the process of crossing international borders have mixed with other children of, from other families who are also making the crossing. And then you find out that they've caught something or the other. So that puts pressure on the pediatric segment of the healthcare system. Is that something you think recipient countries should also be worried about?
Absolutely, and not just for the pediatric services, for all health facilities. Mental health is a very, very big one at the moment. We're aiming for universal health coverage so that everyone can access the health that they need at the time that they need it. But obviously, this is much harder in the face of any humanitarian crisis. And refugees are at much greater risk of being able to access appropriate health care. There might be a big language barrier. They're traumatized. Some of them are not even speaking because of the atrocities that they've witnessed. They've been separated. Attachments have been broken. They've had to leave their spouses, their brothers, their fathers behind for the reasons that we're aware of. So yes, all the services have to absolutely be put in place. But even amongst the refugee population, we have to have special attention to the at-risk groups. The children will always follow the mothers. So while you're looking at child health, you can't separate it from maternal health. You have to look at the elderly, you have to look at those with disability, you have to look at those with mental health problems, and also you have to look at those in marginalized groups. And it's a massive problem. It's a very joined up problem, and we have to look at it as holistically as possible. And vaccination on arrival is one of the ways, like I mentioned, that we can mitigate against this. Different countries have different vaccination schedules, so it's trying to marry what they've already had with what is available in their host countries. But some of this, if you're running from a war, the last thing you're going to be thinking about is to pick up your vaccination card. Most of them you can see walking with just a rucksack on their back. So it's starting the whole program again to protect them as much as possible.
Before I let you go, I must ask about the situation in the UK. The UK has instituted a scheme to accommodate Ukrainians in the UK. The numbers, of course, are nothing like the 2.5 million I referenced when I was talking about Poland. But in terms of the UK itself, are you seeing any of the things you've described as part of the experience that the UK has had receiving migrants and refugees from this war in Ukraine?
Personally, in general practice, I haven't, and I'm based in London, so I expect that we will see a lot more. But the UK has a scheme where it's homes for Ukrainians, which social network is extremely important, especially for refugees. That's one of the biggest traumas that they face. And with this Homes for Ukraine, they're directly linked with families and individuals who are able to receive them into family homes, who are able to support them, and so try to break that chain of trauma that they may have experienced. And there is communication between the host family and the refugee. It's by far not enough. We still need to do a lot more, and the speed at which it's happening, but the speed at the migrants' influx is unprecedented in a very short space of time, the number of Ukrainians that have had to flee the country. So it's still a work in progress, but the Homes for Ukraine is, I believe, will be quite successful in mitigating, again, some of the social disconnect that is likely to happen as a consequence of the war.
Dr. Monique Gasper, medical doctor. The visuals, some of them are quite disheartening there. But want to thank you for your time and for your work in this area. We'll be getting back to you, hopefully, on a happier note further down the line as we continue our coverage of this situation. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you very much. It's not all entirely bad news. We do have some modern trauma experts and equipment, so at least the Ukrainians are getting some of that. But we do, as much as possible, need to mitigate the negative aspects. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. In business news, the United States has stopped the Russian government from paying holders of its sovereign debt more than $600 million from reserves held in American banks in a movement to Russia pressure on Moscow and eat into its holdings of United States dollars. Under sanctions put in place after Russia invaded Ukraine on February the 24th, foreign currency reserves held at the Russian Central Bank by the Russian Central Bank at U.S. financial institutions were frozen. But U.S. Department of Treasury had been allowing the Russian government to use those funds to make coupon payments on dollar-denominated sovereign debt on a case-by-case basis. As the largest of the payments came due, that's $552.4 million principal payments on a maturing bond, the U.S. government decided to cut off Moscow's access to the frozen funds. This includes an $84 million coupon payment on a 2042 sovereign dollar bond. The move was meant to force Moscow to make the difficult decision of whether it would use dollars that it has access to for payments on its debt or for other purposes, including supporting its war efforts. Let's talk to Laddie Williams, as usual, about all this and other developments. Laddie, we did talk about this yesterday, and we did say that there could be a refusal.
Exactly.
Now that has happened.
It's happening now, and I can imagine bondholders right now, you know, Russian sovereign bonds must be very nervous right now because, you know, we've seen the U.S. now make a U-turn. Before they allowed U.S. banks to actually make some of these coupon payments and principal payments. But now, with this new move, a default is likely because, as we know now, Russia, with the financial sanctions, you know, by the U.S. and its allies, we've seen they're not able to carry out most of these transactions.
Right.
But now, if they say, we've seen Putin say, okay, we're going to pay in rubles.
Right.
But these are dollar-denominated bonds.
And they don't want to get paid in rubles.
Exactly. So now it's going to be a default if they pay in rubles. And now we've seen most bondholders right now, they're actually, you know, nervous. You know,
the word is nervous.
Exactly.
Nervous.
So now this move is to drain, you know, whatever dollars, you know, that Russia actually has right now, and whatever revenue is going to come in, you know, at some point. It's quite a drastic move because it's going to impact, you know, these bondholders. They're not going to be able to get their payments, their coupons, and their principal if Russia is not able to, you know, do some magic, you know, at this point. But they have a 30-day grace period. So it remains to be seen if what Putin has, you know, on his sleeves at this point.
Germany has done what Russia did near the start of this situation when it took control of Gazprom. Now, Gazprom is a Russian gas company, but it's taking control of its offices in Germany.
In Germany,
and
yes.
As you and I were talking of off camera, this is not a production facility because the gas is being produced back in Russia. This is probably an administrative office.
Yeah, but and the thing is, why this particular subsidiary is important is because it's the largest storage, you know, center for gas, you know, for that Gazprom, you know, has in Germany. So it's a huge lifeline for Germany at this point. So this move is to secure their gas supplies
for a while.
For a while, at least till September. They say it's, you know, temporary. You know, it's not a permanent a takeover at this point. But it's a move to secure gas because we know Germany relies heavily, you know, on most of Russia's gas. This facility called Gazprom Germania is the biggest storage facility in Germany. So it's a strategic move to make sure that whatever is in there stays there, and they actually can take them to at least September, till we see what happens. With
hopefully they're hoping, I'm sure, by September some kind of closure would have been brought to this crisis. Now, Slovakia says it's looking very seriously at paying in rubles for gas because they don't have anybody else to buy gas.
Yeah, Slovakia is a different story. They rely 85% on Russian gas at this point. So they say, you know what, if it takes paying in rubles at this point to make sure we still get our gas supplies, we will make that payment. But obviously they still stand with Europe when it comes to their position against Russia. But they're saying, you know what, at the end of the day, it's a seller's market. We have to
comply.
We have to buy.
If they say we have to buy in rubles,
we have to buy in ruble, we will pay in ruble at this point.
How are the markets faring?
Well, the markets are not bad. We've seen European markets actually in the green. They closed in the green yesterday, and even this morning it's green. We're seeing U.S. markets, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, that's up, NASDAQ up. And we're also seeing oil up at this point, obviously because of sanctions, more sanctions being mauled by Europe at this point. So obviously traders are looking at this, okay, this could bring more supply concerns at this point. So it's driving the price of oil, which is obviously not good. We see the U.S. trying hard to bring down the price of oil with their strategic reserves. But as it looks now, with more sanctions coming to Russia, it translates to supply disruptions, and that translates to higher oil prices, which is not good for energy costs at this point, which is still stoking inflation.
Well, if you're an investor in any of these markets, Larry and Ini have all the details of this, and we'll be unpacking that right after this on Business Morning, and then, of course, on Biz Incorporated later on in the afternoon.
Right.
But for now, Larry, nice to see you.
Thank you.
We'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll be on the last leg of the Russian invasion, where we'll be taking a look at theater and music. Please stay on with us. The United Nations rights boss has called for an independent and effective investigation after horrifying, that's in quotes, images emerged from Bucha, which could amount to war crimes.
Images of civilians lying dead on the streets and in improvised graves in the town of Bucha in Ukraine are horrifying. Reports emerging from this and other areas raise serious and disturbing questions about possible war crimes, grave breaches of international humanitarian law, and serious violations of international human rights law. It's essential that all bodies are identified, including those that need to be exhumed, so that victims' families can be informed and the exact cause of death established. And all measures should be taken to preserve evidence. It's vital that all efforts are made to ensure that there are independent and effective investigations into what happened in Bucha to ensure truth, justice and accountability, as well as reparations and remedy for victims and their families.
The head of the UN Refugee Agency has asked Europe to be generous in welcoming to other migrants, just as it has with Ukrainian refugees, following the death of dozens of African migrants at sea. It comes after 90 people died in international waters of the Mediterranean Sea after setting off from Libya in an overcrowded boat. The medical charity Médecins Sans Frontières said that only 4 people were rescued from the raft last weekend. The UNHCR chief, Filippo Grandi, said Europe had hosted Ukrainian refugees generously and effectively and should consider the same for other refugees. He had tweeted that it must now urgently consider how to apply this to other refugees and migrants knocking in distress at its doors. News media around the world is abuzz with reports of a shallow grave in the Ukrainian village of Mochizn, the people having been allegedly shot dead by Russian military. The bodies are said to have been identified as those of the head of the village of Olha-Shonenko, her husband, and her son, and there's still no word on the fourth body. The family was taken hostage by Russian troops 10 days ago. They reportedly came for the village head, but her husband insisted on going with her, and after 6 hours, they took her son as well. It comes as more reactions continue to trail the killing of civilians discovered in the town of Bucha near the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. We do warn you, some of the videos, pictures you're about to see may be hard to watch.
This is the shallow grave where head of the village of Motizim and her family was found, their bodies partially covered with sand. It's not certain who killed the family, and Moscow has denied reports its troops have been targeting civilians, also denying the killings in Bucha outside Kyiv. Residents say there have been Russian occupiers in Motizim, and there appear to have been a traitor in the village leading to the killings. The killings in Bucha, uncovered on Sunday, has been drawing reactions. Ukraine authorities accuse Russia of deliberately killing civilians during the month-long occupation of the town. The mayor showed 2 corpses with white cloths tied around the arms, which he said was what residents were forced to wear by fighters from Chechnya, a region in southern Russia that has deployed troops to Ukraine to support Russian forces. One corpse had his hands bound by the white cloth and appeared to have been shot in the mouth. Satellite images of the town show an approximately 14-meter trench dug into the grounds of a church where a mass grave has been identified. The images captured on March 31st followed previous imagery from March 10th that shows signs of excavation on the grounds of the Church of St. Andrew, Pierre Vosvanaho All Saints. Meanwhile, another drone filmed on Sunday showed destroyed and damaged residential buildings in the besieged city of Mariupol. Mariupol has been under heavy bombardment for weeks. Images also showed badly damaged interior of a theater in the city, bearing testimony to the scale of Russian attacks. The mayor of the city estimates that on March 25th, the death toll in the theater was about 300. Russia still denies bombing the building. Tens of thousands of civilians have been trapped in the city for weeks with scant food, water and other supplies. The UN estimates that more than 4 million people have left Ukraine since the fighting started on February 24th. The Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, says Ukraine's version of what happened in Bucha was a fake attack aimed at undermining Moscow. Ukrainian authorities say they're investigating possible crimes by Russian forces.
Opposite to music, the silence of ruined cities and killed people. Our children draw swooping rockets, not shooting stars. Over 400 children have been injured and 153 children died, and we'll never see them drawing. Our parents are happy to wake up in the morning in bomb shelters, but alive. Our loved ones don't know if we will be together again. The war doesn't let us choose who survives and who stays in eternal silence. Our musicians wear body armor instead of tuxedo. They sing to the wounded in hospitals, even to those who can't hear them, but the music will break through anyway. We defend our freedom to live, to love, to sound. On our land, we are fighting Russia, which brings horrible silence with its bombs, the dead silence. Feel the silence with your music. Feel it today to tell our story. Tell the truth about the war on your social networks, on TV. Support us in any way you can, any but not silence. And then peace will come. To all our cities, the war is destroying. Chernihiv, Kharkiv, Volnovakha, Mariupol, and others, they are legends already, but I have a dream of them living and free, like you on the Grammy stage.
Rain down, rain down, till we're all free.
And from one musical interlude to another, before the start of the military action in Ukraine, St. Petersburg's famous Mikhailovsky Theater used to attract the largest number of foreign performers of any venue in Russia. The theater's art director, Vladimir Kekman, says after Russian forces entered Ukraine, most of those performers and many Russians as well have left the country taking unpaid leave. The theater, which has hosted some of the world's top performers, is now relying on local talent to keep performances going and audiences lining up to attend. But he added that some foreign performers were already returning. Tugan Sokya, principal conductor and musical director of the Bolshoi Theater of Russia, said he decided to quit his job. But ballet dancer Anastasia Soboleva insisted the show would go on. We do not intend to stop or take some sort of a pause. Art must serve people, bring light and inspiration. That's the message from those singers. And it's on that prospectively happier note that we end the program this morning. I'm Ladi Akiri Dulwale. There'll be an update at 5 o'clock in the evening, and the show will be back tomorrow. Do have yourselves a good Tuesday ahead. Bye-bye.